Welcome to America's National Vietnam War Veterans Day observance at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. I'm Marine Corps veteran Martin Martinez Jr., your Master of Ceremonies, and a son to a Vietnam combat veteran, U.S. Army Specialist 5, Martin Martinez Sr., who served in Vietnam from 1969 to 1970. Today's ceremony honors our nation's Vietnam veterans, families, and survivors who served honorably and sacrificed so much. This year is a particularly significant ceremony as it occurs during our nation's 250th birthday. The ceremony will begin with an invocation followed by remarks from special guests. At this time, please stand if you are able for the presentation of our nation's colors, and please remain standing for the performance of our national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the rampart we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Colors, right shoulder, arms.
Distinguished guests, please remain standing for the invocation. For today's invocation, please let me introduce Chaplain Kimberly Willis, Executive Director of Chaplain Service for the United States Department of Veterans Affairs.
Good morning. Please join me in prayer, reflective of your tradition as I pray in my tradition. Gracious and sovereign God, on this sacred day, Vietnam War Veterans Day, we gather where memory lingers like morning mist and gratitude rises like the sun. We come anchored in your word, which states that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Draw near to us, O God, as we stand on this holy ground of remembrance. We remember those who answered the call, who walked into valleys unknown. Guided by duty, sustained by courage, they moved through shadows and fire, yet held fast to something greater than themselves, each other, their families, their country, their God. So we honor those who did not return, seeds sown into the earth of a distant land, yet rising in legacy, in memory, and sacred trust. Receive them, O God, into your eternal keeping. Let light perpetual shine upon them like stars that refuse to be extinguished. We lift before you those who came home but carry echoes of the battlefield within, for bodies that bear the weight of history, for minds where memories linger like unending light, for spirits thirsting for peace. Be their refuge and their restoration. As you have spoken, he heals the brokenhearted and binds up the wounds. So bind, O God, what has been broken. Speak peace into the storm within. Let healing flow like a quiver through every unseen place of pain. We remember the families, those who stood as watchful sentinels of love, who held faith through absence and embraced both the returning and the unspoken losses they carried. Be their shelter, O God, their strength beneath the weight, their song in the silence. As your word declares, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. And now we turn to those still unaccounted for, the prisoners of war, the missing in action, names carried on the wind, yet never lost to you. For you have said, can a mother forget the child at her breast? Though she may forget, I will not forget you. Hold them, O God, in the palm of your eternal care. Sustain the families who wait, whose hope flickers like a candle in the night. Let it not be extinguished. Be their light until all is made known. God of mercy, God of remembrance, teach us to walk as people who remember well, not only in word but in witness. Let justice roll like waters and compassion rise like a steady flame within us, and we may honor sacrifice with service and memory with faithful care. As we close, O God, bless this nation. Like rain upon dry ground, like light upon a weary path, guide us in wisdom, steady in unity, and lead us in the ways of peace. And may your grace rest upon us, your peace dwell within us, and your love carry us forward, now and always. It is in your matchless name we pray. Amen.
Retire the colors.
Color! Color! Turn! March! 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 March!
Today's 2026 National Vietnam War Veterans Day Silent Wreath-laying ceremony specifically honors the more than 58,000 Vietnam veterans who paid the ultimate sacrifice to this nation. In addition, we also recognize the 1,560 service members and civilians still missing and unaccounted for from that conflict. At this time, we will now observe a moment of silence to honor those who are unaccounted for and their families. Please reflect quietly during this time. Thank you for your silence and reflection. Please be seated. I'm pleased to introduce the President of the Vietnam Veterans of America, Mr. Tom Burke, representing those veterans who served. Vietnam Veterans of America is the nation's only congressionally chartered veteran service organization dedicated to the needs of Vietnam-era veterans and their families. In keeping with VVA's founding principle, never again will one generation of veterans abandon another. VVA advocates on behalf of all our nation's veterans.
Good morning, everyone. Today we mark the Vietnam Veterans Day ceremonies, a day to not simply remember a war, but to recognize the men and women who served during one of the most difficult chapters in our nation's history. For 250 years, Americans have been answering the call to service in our nation's military. For many Vietnam veterans, during the years of Vietnam, coming home was not the moment of welcome and appreciation that earlier generations experienced. The cost of war was not measured in statistics, but in lives lost, and futures interrupted, and families forever changed. Instead of parades and open arms, too many of us returned to a country deeply divided over the war. The anger about conflict was too often directed at the young Americans who fought the war. Many Vietnam veterans were ignored. Many were disrespected. Too many were blamed. The veterans who served were not responsible for the war, but they answered the call to serve their country anyway. Their experience shaped an entire generation. They gave birth to the Vietnam Veterans Guiding Principle. Never again will one generation of veterans abandon another. For the past 9 years, our nation has marked March 29th as Vietnam Veterans Day to thank and honor Vietnam veterans who gave so much. Here today, we stand in a place of healing as we reflect on the black granite wall those who paid the price of freedom with their blood. We are reminded of the true price of war. Each name represents someone who was loved, a husband, a father, a son, a daughter, brother, sister, neighbor, or even a friend. Our prayers are with Gold Star families, those who got the knock on their door, those who waited for years, and those who still wait. Never again will one generation of veterans abandon another. Those words are more than a motto. They are a promise. Vietnam veterans vowed that what happened to us would never happen to another generation of veterans, ever. At the time, our country was weary and divided on the war. For decades, Vietnam veterans have tried to live up to that promise by standing beside veterans of every war and conflict. Over time, our communities changed, and our country finally realized that the warrior and the war were not the same. Cities held parades long overdue, and America began to say, thank you. Today, many Vietnam veterans are now in their 70s and 80s. I call them mature guys. We have become senior statesmen in the veteran community, and that carries both responsibility and opportunity. We have the opportunity to pass along the lessons that we learned. We also have the responsibility to teach younger veterans how to care for one another, how to advocate for those who had PTSD, victims of Agent Orange, toxic exposure, and the list goes on. How to continue strengthening the bond between the military and the nation. No matter how you feel about the war, never take the matter out on the warrior who fought that war. The truth is simple. Veterans need to take care of each other, but the responsibility does not rest with veterans alone. To those in the audience today who may not have served in uniform, we ask a very simple thing. Don't blame the warrior for the war. The men and women who serve do so because your country asked them to. And when they come home, they deserve our respect, they deserve our support, they deserve help to transition back into civilian life. When veterans come home, I can assure you they carry experiences that most will never see or fully understand. A little gratitude can go a long ways to making a difference. Vietnam Veterans Day reminds us of not only the past, but of our responsibility to the future. And today, as our nation once again have young Americans fighting a war, the lessons of Vietnam are clear. People may debate the war, but the men and women who sent to fight it must always know their country stands behind them now and when they come home. And it's now my privilege to introduce someone who embodies the values of service, leadership, and dedication. Please help me welcome our Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth.
Well, Tom, thank you very much for those words on this sacred ground, this wall, these names, truly sacred ground. And what's said on that flag, that POW MIA flag, is you are not forgotten. And we say a lot, often, never forget. And I can say on behalf of our department, having been in Vietnam a few months ago, having been around the globe, we have not forgotten. We're still looking. We're working with the VA to ensure that every last one, every single soul, every single American in that conflict and others comes home. It's a reflection of who we are, of what America represents, how we cherish the lives of those who defend us, the best of America. We will never forget, never. But today I would ask you to go one step further than never forget. It means much the same. It's just the inverse. It's more active. Yes, we will never forget. But more importantly, we will always remember. We will always remember what they gave, the courage they showed, those 58,000, the vast majority volunteers from big cities and small towns, city boys and country boys, shoulder to shoulder, fighting for each other. We will always remember the courage they showed, their willingness to be cold warriors. Never forget the context of this conflict. There was a Cold War around the globe, and it was unclear who would rise and who would fall, who would win and who would lose. And in the geopolitical context, the understanding was they were holding the line against a communist advance. That was their belief. That's what they volunteered for. We always remember why they fought. Now, unsurprisingly, politics, politicians, other prerogatives got in the mix, got in the way. Things got complicated. But for those warriors, their mission on that battlefield for each other remained clear to them, if not in the macro sense. We always remember them for what they were willing to do. And I can say, as a veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan, it is the Vietnam generation. It is those warriors who looked to us, that generation, Vietnam specifically, that looked at us and said, welcome home. That looked at us and said, we have your back. That looked at us and separated the politics from the warriors. They walked up and shook our hands. And then we had a chance to look back at them and say, welcome home. In a way that we didn't even understand, because we weren't even born, we were kids. One small example, a member of my community, his name is Ron Lasuda. He's a Vietnam veteran. I hope he texts me after this when he sees this. Family friend of ours. I grew up playing basketball with his sons, and he's a heck of a player himself. Still plays today. I had no idea that he was a Vietnam veteran. Neither did our entire community for the entirety of the time that I was growing up. No idea at all, because Ron didn't talk about it. Nobody talked about it. He'd been internalized to not talk about it. Only in the last 10, 15 years was he willing to talk about his Purple Heart recipient. showed incredible courage on the battlefield, should be celebrated by the community. And he is now, as we right those wrongs. But he welcomed me back before I knew at all what he had done, which is a testament how they took the pain that they felt, the rejection that they felt, and they poured it, Tom, as you said, into the next generation, to never forget and to always remember. And now it's veterans of this generation that turn to those on the battlefield right now, and ensure that they have absolutely everything that they need. That there will be debates in that Capitol building. There will be debates all across the nation. But what we know is that we will have the backs of those warfighters. We will ensure that they are celebrated, that their sacrifice is honored, that every part of our society recognizes that they are the real 1%. The special Americans willing to raise their right hand and commit to something greater than themselves. And what the Vietnam generation did, they did it when it was unpopular. Then when they did it when society told them other things were important, those Americans recognized that putting the uniform on and fighting for their country was the single most honorable thing they could do, whether the country recognized it or deserved them or not. And so on this day, I'm grateful for the VA for recognizing this, holding it up, and honoring Vietnam veterans. We'll do everything we can in our department to continue to do the same, to ensure that we never forget what they did, and that through line continues so that our country never commits the sins that it committed on that generation ever again. And those who repaired it were not the protesters of that time, but were the men and women in uniform who came home, built families, built communities, built churches, built businesses, and then poured into the next generation of warriors who came home and ensured it never happened again. So may we always remember what they did and continue to live it through to the current generation. May God bless our Vietnam veterans. Thank you. I'm supposed to introduce the main event. My apologies. It's been an absolute. I've known Doug Collins for many years. Many of you knew him as well in various roles, to include congressman. I've gotten to know him as a friend. I've gotten to know him as a human being. I've gotten to know him as a brother in Christ. I've gotten to know him as a fellow cabinet member. You have nobody better with a deeper heart for our veterans than Doug Collins. It's an honor to stand with him each and every day on behalf of our veterans. Ladies and gentlemen, the Secretary of the VA, Doug Collins.
Good morning. You know, when I was walking down and listening to Tom and Pete, my mind goes back to a time almost 38 years ago. It was a time not like this. It was a quiet evening. And a young Hill intern who had nothing to do that night said, I want to go by and see the wall. And I walked the same path that I walked about 15 minutes ago, except by myself. It was at night, and as those of you who know, it has a special place here at night. Something begins to speak to you. And as you walk by, you could feel the presence. We have many of you who have served in Vietnam. Some of our Medal of Honor recipients and soon to be are those who served in wars like myself and Pete in a faraway place called Iraq. But on that night, I had no idea what my future held. But I could hear the voices of this wall. I didn't know what to expect. It was my first time. As I walked down through there, I began to see the very things that you see at the foot of this wall now. I stopped to read the letters. I noticed the note from a young girl that said, Dad, I miss you. I wish I could tell you. I see packs of cigarettes. Yeah, even a beer can. But as I continue to walk down, I also notice flags, flowers, pictures, poems, and letters. It was at that moment it began even more in me as a young child who I go back another 15 years was watching on TV a war that I didn't really understand to be too young, but I did understand what it looked like, and I understood when they scrolled the names, and I understood when they talked about problems far away from my little home in Gainesville, Georgia. You see, when you begin to put things together, it leads you from your past to your future. Last year was 50 years of us leaving Vietnam. I choose not to look at it as 50 years of remembrance that we have. I now choose to look at this next year as an eternity of looking forward and taking the lessons that were given to us. The lessons of sacrifice and love. The lessons of a young man who I served with in the Georgia State House, who was, when he was young, came home, and I remember sitting in the little anteroom off the Georgia House floor, and he looked at me because I was getting ready to deploy. And this is a man who didn't say a lot, Tom. But he began to talk, and with tears welled up in his eyes, and he said, "I'm going to tell you something, Doug. When you come home, I'm going to be there." He said, "I'm going to say, it's good to see you." He said, because when I got home, I got into a cab, and the cab driver looked at me and saw me in my uniform, and he said, "Did you just come over?" And I said, "Yes, I just got home." He said, "Get out." Never again. The warriors of this country are the ones who support everything that we get to do. From the press to the protesters, from the good to the bad, it is those who raise their right hand and say, "I will go because others have went before me. I will go because I have been given more than I could ever repay." When President Trump honored me by putting me in this position, a lifetime of experience began to come together. Not something I expected. And just as I was walking down just a few minutes ago, I never thought that my pathway to the VA would be a pathway that started over 38 years ago, with the voice of this wall still speaking to me. The Vietnam veteran changed the VA more than any generation it has been around. It came back and was met with not the adequate care that it should have gotten. It came back and met with almost, frankly, no care and left by themselves. They stood up and said never. They stood up and said not again. They stood up and helped shape us into the VA we are today. Vet centers are there because of the Vietnam generation. The vet centers that I think are the greatest thing in the world because they hit every veteran no matter where they are, and they say, "You have a home here." They took our hospitals and said, "You got to learn to treat us better." They took our benefits and went to Congress and said, "You're missing some, and we don't want to forget." And for those of us who still long for those over 1,000 to come back home, we will never stop, we will never forget, and they will always be on our mind. But when a generation impacts a country like the Vietnam generation did, and the generation of people that I serve as Secretary of VA, and those that Pete does at the Secretary of War, it's a reminder that these names will be forever etched. There may be fewer things placed at the base. There may be some who don't have a personal memory. But for those of us who will gather every year on this day, we will remember. But then I also promise you this: we will look forward. We will take what this generation gave to us And we'll never stop asking, especially at my department, who we put first, and that is the veteran. Because Vietnam taught us that if we don't put the veteran first, this country has put itself last. And I will never stand for that. And those who are gathered here and those that are walking by today, hear my voice clearly. From this president on down, there's a solemn meaning to the word service. There's a solemn meaning to the word sacrifice. And we will never forget. But we will look forward. Because I have found that sometimes when you look backwards too much, you forget where you're going. Thank you to this generation who could have stopped, who could have got mad, who could have got bitter, who could have turned away from the very country that had sent it. But thank God you remembered why you raised your right hand, why you went. Because when you came home, you looked forward. And it is that forward that brings us here today. For generations may not hear what I speak or any of us spoke today, but I do know that as long as veterans band together, is this brotherhood and sisterhood of those who serve, remember, we'll always remember why this country is strong. We'll always remember why we are the light of the world, because we treat those who serve us as they should be treated. Veterans first is simply our guiding principle at the VA. But for those of you who didn't hear it, for those of you who had to suffer through it, for those of you who had to take your pain and turn it into positive for those that came after, all I'll have to say is on this day, again, as all others, welcome home, and God bless you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for the second part of our observance, a silent wreath-laying. 3 wreaths will be presented today. The first, the center wreath for National Vietnam War Veterans Day, will be laid by the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, the Honorable Doug Collins, the President of the Vietnam Veterans of America, Mr. Tom Burke, and the Secretary of War, the Honorable Pete Hegseth. This wreath is a symbol of commemorating the significance of this day. The second wreath, to its left, to honor our nation's warriors, will be laid by Vietnam veterans Army Sergeant John Reiling III, Army Specialist Dominique Yezo, and Air Force Master Sergeant Rose Duvall, who is also a Gold Star mother. This wreath is to honor our Vietnam veterans, those still missing, those still with us, those represented on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and those who have passed since the war. The final wreath, to the right, is to honor our warriors' families and will be laid by the Gold Star wife of Lieutenant Commander Barton S. Creed, Miss Susan Creed Percy, the Gold Star daughter of Lieutenant Colonel Anthony C. Shine, Miss Colleen Shine, and Carrie Rogers, son of Major Charles E. Rogers, who remains missing and unaccounted for. All of these carry important and symbolic representations, and with this wreath-laying, we honor the service, valor, and sacrifice of all of our Vietnam veterans and remember the deep loss and sacrifice by their families. There will be a moment of silence after each wreath is laid. At this time, I ask that each official party proceed to their wreath. Taps will be played after all 3 wreaths are laid and will mark the conclusion of today's ceremony. As a reminder, when taps is sounded, stand if able, and render honors by placing your right hand over your heart or rendering a hand salute. For all observers, I ask that respectful silence is maintained throughout the ceremony. After the formal wreath laying, the ceremony will conclude. This concludes the 2026 National Vietnam War Veterans Day observance. Please remain in place for the departure of the official party.